Hello, and I'm here today to talk about event-enabled fintech and some changes we're seeing in the industry and how that's changing how fintech companies can respond to their customers. I'm Phil Scanlon. I'm from Solace, and I look after the field technology organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Solace, just so you understand where I'm coming from, a little bit about the industry drivers, event-driven architecture, which is essentially an architectural approach to solving certain types of problems. And then we'll talk through some use cases of how banks and financial institutions are using event-driven architecture to approach problems in a new way. So first, a little bit about Solace. We've been around since about 2001. It started in the capital market space, so really solving the most demanding data movement problems within some of those companies. Over the years, and more predominantly outside of capital markets in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a very large expansion of interest in event-driven technologies. And through that evolution of our company, we've introduced terms such as event mesh, event broker, and event portal to the market. And you know, leading the technology companies in this space, we were the first company to build a platform that encompasses more of what companies would need to embrace EDA. And we also last year created the first EDA summit. We ran that almost a year ago. And we've got a new, May the 4th this year, we'll be running our second summit around EDA. It's not just about Solace, it's for industry participants and customers and practitioners to talk about EDA, and that's coming up. We are deployed in a large number of investment banks. We do not just financial services, so we work in industries like smart cities, telcos, manufacturing, retail, fast-moving consumer goods. We do billions of events, so we've always been known as a very high throughput platform. And we partner with the likes of SAP. If you're familiar with SAP Event Mesh, that is Solace. We also work with the likes of Boomi, with MuleSoft, and with many integration technology providers who are looking to bring event-driven into their customers. From a client perspective, we are broadly deployed across the globe. Specifically in India, we work with NSE, with Jio, with Airtel, and some of the global banks deployed there. And what do we do? Well, essentially, we help enterprises become real-time businesses through the power of using event-driven architecture. So why is that important? Well, what we're seeing at the moment, the last couple of years have been probably the most disruptive time on the planet in recent times. And it really has been the new normal. So that the drive for digitization, the drive to react quicker to worldwide events and to events in countries is the new normal. So companies need to be more agile. So what we see from the business side is people trying to improve digital experiences, improve the operational efficiency, accelerate innovation programs, but at the same time, do this without adding significant costs. So it's not money has to come somewhere to fund these kind of initiatives. So what we're seeing then from the IT side is that people are moving more towards real-time event-driven systems. We're seeing the adoption of hybrid cloud platforms, so leveraging cloud infrastructure and moving compute across different locations. That then is driving this decoupling. So things are more distributed. With decoupling, you need more resilience because you have more things in more different places and more scale. And when you distribute things further, you also need access to information, access to up-to-date data. But this is democratized. So we're seeing, especially in the broader banks, retail space, where customers of domain is managed and domain-specific ownership and domain-specific design of data models is distributed, and then democratizing access is important. So There we go. So that kind of covers some of the changes on the business side and the IT requirements. The other thing that's really happened over the past sort of 4 or 5 years, the current approach is around sort of what we class as integration or middleware, very much around system to system, so SOA and messaging, and around APIs, so wrapping access to data via APIs. What we've seen is a shift towards event-driven. So moving away from point-to-point access to data and moving into more event-driven. And we'll cover what event-driven is shortly. One of the changes, though, that's facilitated that in this whole decoupling distribution is the network around 2012, 2013 became faster than disk. So it was faster to have, to use compute distributed across a network rather than sharing via a data store or a file system. And that's really opened up the ability to solve problems differently. So let's go back to talk a little bit about events and what they mean for business. So, when we think about events, an event could be for a retailer, it could be a launch of a phone. And with that launch of the phone, you will get lots and lots of orders. So, as part of an order, you're going to onboard that customer. So you get this large volume of events happening around this launch. If we look at payments, payments is an area going through a large amount of disruption at the moment. Governments are mandating real-time settlement, real-time payments, being able to do, as soon as I make a payment, I want the funds to be available in the recipient's account immediately or within seconds. And these payments are not just for high value, but they're also for low value. So that's putting a lot of change and looking at the whole payment architecture as a series of events is actually a very efficient way of doing that. And then finally, looking at something like capital markets. So Solace started in capital markets. Events are things like, price, orders, trades, pieces of news, and the value of that obviously was the quicker you can react to that, the more money you can make as a trading company, but it can only be done, needs to be done efficiently at large scale. And also if you look at things like FX trading, that can happen on a global basis. So being able to react anywhere across the planet to a change that's happening in a certain country. Time is money, and really looking at event-driven systems and event-driven thinking, that's the way that capital markets have always built their trading systems. So let's look at some of these problems that EDA solves in a more general way. So firstly, event-driven allows your business to operate in real time. And that may be, in a logistics sort of a use case might be that you're currently doing batch. So you're basically moving files around in a batch, a file with a whole load of payments, a file with a load of piece of data. When that gets loaded into a system, that's then, that batch transfer happens. If something's depending on knowing when that data is in the system, then we have to do what's called polling, so periodic polling. So if I don't know how long it's going to take before that batch file arrives in the system, I may poll every second or every couple of seconds or every minute. It's very wasteful on compute. So if I look at a real-time view of that with EDA, as an event happens, it's delivered individually as the piece of data, but that can then trigger an alert or a notification. So it's more of a push way of solving problems. So looking at that, it's a push and streaming way of solving problems. It's very complementary to the on-demand. So if you look at something like a payment, someone may request a payment. That happens sporadically. That's something that will happen via an API. You want security around it. You want the enterprise view of the payment. But once that happens, all of the reactions to that event happening, all of the reactions to the payment initiation, things like checking checking balances, checking for fraud, validating that the payment is valid, checking blacklists, those are events and those can be handled as events. So it's very complementary. And then thirdly, looking at the broader event-driven integration, event-driven allows you to decouple things. So traditionally, we've always thought of the initiator controlling who the target is. So I'm going to call system XYZ, or if I have an integration tool, I'm going to call the integration tool. The integration tool knows that it's going to integrate with 1, 2, or 3 systems. With decoupling, you actually break that, and not just at the technology level, but from the thinking level. So you may publish an event to say, a payment's been made. Who reacts to that, and how systems react to that is determined at runtime. So it gives you this dynamic nature and this ability to adapt and scale and change how systems respond to each other via this eventing layer. And that obviously gives you a lot more agility and decoupling when you have innovation, when you're bringing on new payment channels, when you're bringing in a new notification capability. So not having to change the source of events to be able to react to the events is a huge driver. Obviously around real time gives us the capability. The last piece is really looking at as a shock absorber. So, the reality of most banking and financial services companies is there is legacy. It works at a certain pace. And a lot of the burst of load that we get with events, Black Friday shopping, events where things are happening that drive unforeseen load onto systems. You want to isolate your legacy from that load, and event-driven allows you to do that, so that something that happens at the front end will eventually happen and be consistent at the back end, and the back end is allowed to be decoupled and can catch up as it happens, and it introduces some new patterns of thinking. From a market perspective, really, 5 years ago, we had the likes of Gartner saying people had to start thinking about this. A year later, really situational awareness, real time, will be a characteristic of new systems. A couple of years ago, really sort of saying by about now, event notifications, API management tools, EDA patterns are very common. I can vouch for that. So, when I'm talking now to the likes of organizations across the landscape of, what are you doing with your integration tooling? They're all adding event-driven integration as a capability. They're looking at the reactivity. They're looking at the notification style use case. They're looking at the customer responsive type use cases and seeing it as the enabling technology to provide that. So let's quickly look at some use cases in fintech. So, looking at, the whole bank-wide transformation. So, banks made up of many different divisions, being able to decouple these, not just at a server level, but from a data movement and an event communication. So adopting event synchronization, async synchronization. So if you're familiar with domain-driven design, if you're familiar with data mesh as a concept, as event mesh as a concept, this is really about allowing things to happen in one part of the network and to eventually flow across to other parts. So looking at payments, a use case we see very often is, new payment platforms, new payment applications need to operate at a much higher scale. We're talking about micropayments, so the volume has increased. And so digital apps are being modernized to be able to provide a much more interactive experience to allow payment for real-time goods at a point of sale and have real-time settlement. In Singapore, we have the likes of Nets, who do real-time payments via QR code in food courts where your meals are very, very low cost, very high volume of transactions. Again, on transactions, being able to track and trace in real time what's been happening across this. So even if we've got things like payment files and payment loads from external companies that you provide a payment service to, being able to see and track that in real time. Obviously, regulation, a very large portion of interest, especially around real-time risk exposure, real-time capability for payments. Looking at the broader interbank payments and open banking, really again providing capabilities for supporting those. Notifications, so one of the banks in India in terms of letting a customer know where you're at in the processing cycle. Notifications at scale is very event driven. You don't want your customers polling to see what's going on, because that will cause massive amounts of load and can cause the systems to just destabilize and run slow. Around with decoupled systems where you have things like resilience requirements, mission criticality, event brokers, event-driven technology can provide a foundation layer that allows you to meet those disaster recovery requirements. So we're seeing with cloud, if you're using cloud, then you have to use more than one cloud. So how do you distribute the events across multiple clouds without using very point-to-point distribution? So again, using event-driven and an event mesh to span those. And again, this is where we sort of see that multi-cloud environment really driving investment of an infrastructure capability that feeds across that. So from a Solace perspective, I've kind of covered a few of those. So we've been doing the likes of bank-wide transformations, some of the larger banks like Standard Chartered, Macquarie, Citibank, but as well as digital native banks, whole banks that have digital native divisions. So likes of WeLab Bank, Union Bank, WeBank have built a platform that they sell, which is event driven from the core. From the payments perspective, inside of the global banks, but as well into some of these, the Australian market is going through some payment modernization with the MPI, the payments platform being mandated by the government. For interbank and bank-to-bank via the likes of SWIFT or via direct capabilities, the likes of NETS and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and also credit card payments, so looking at cards as well. So really, across the board. We also, not covering it today very much, but we see the likes of the insurance providers with kind of digital transformation and claims management, and providing that real interactive experience to customers. Very briefly looking at how a lot of the similar technologies are in existence in organizations, and one of the evolutions we've seen, I talked about from the industry, seeing EDA emerge out of integration, really seeing this evolution from some point-to-point connectivity through ESB, trying to centralize some of the functionality, but really producers still need to knowing where the information is going, to a full event-driven architecture. So really a complete decoupling and a rethink of how information is distributed. So again, covered a little bit around StanChart. Indian Bank notification systems, so bringing out new capabilities, really around regulatory, customer satisfaction, being able to do billions of messages per day. So one of the things that people historically may associate with some of these technologies is that scale is not possible. Solace have been in the scale and performance business for a long time, but it's also scale relative. So even if you're a very small organization, you're much better using a more efficient data movement technology that requires less infrastructure at a small scale, even if you're not going to grow to a very large scale. Again, you need your reliability, so zero data loss, guaranteed delivery, even in case of outage. So we find more and more that customers are looking for the ability to rely on infrastructure to provide guarantees of availability so that they can simplify their application development. With Macquarie Bank, they actually moved, they were an entirely on-premise organization using hardware. So we started off in hardware. They really wanted to shift how they deployed software, but also move everything to the cloud. There's a case study about how they went in the course of 6 months. So really looking at taking advantage of cloud infrastructure and modernizing how it was being used. Okay, I talked a little about Event Mesh, so I think, conscious of time, I'll just wrap up. So, Solace, I mentioned, we provide a platform to allow companies to become event-driven. There's really two parts to that. One is the Event Mesh itself, so the ability for applications to connect anywhere using open protocols to be able to exchange events. The second, and this is really around governance of adoption, that We provide an event management capability, so we call it the event portal, that allows you to visualize how your applications are going to talk to each other. Because you have this decoupling, so you need to be able to determine where information is flowing. You need to be able to work on your governance, your security models, your taxonomy of events. So we provide that. So in closing, looking at advice, people on this journey. So, event-driven is here. It's very, very now. Things like async API and the open standards are really good for future-proofing. So, with any new technology, you want to be looking at, doing something today, but knowing event-driven is going to be around for a long time. Don't lock yourself into technologies or proprietary standards. Look for the openness, look for the interoperability from day one. Look to the likes of analysts, so Gartner, Forrester, IDC, they've been increasing their coverage massively in this area over the last 2 years, and it's matured quite a lot, so worth consulting. And then the final two things, so I mentioned Event Mesh, the foundation for your real-time, and Event Portal allows you to really govern that. So thank you for listening in. Come along to our virtual kiosk and chat to us about how we can help you and understand what you're trying to do on your event-driven journey. Thank you.